Yes, we are 2 seconds into the live stream. Thank you so much for joining in today. We have been having a series of discussions, and I just want to jump right in into introductions. So today we're going to be discussing teenage pregnancies. We're going to be discussing defilement. We're going to be discussing incest, which are very heavy topics, but we have a very capable and uh, very professional panel that we have lined up for you today. So I'd go straight into the introductions. Um, Please, our panelists, tell us your name and what activity your organization is involved in with regards to the topic of the day. So we will start with you, Nafula Wafula.
Yeah, so hi, my name is, I'm just going to switch on my Wi-Fi. I think I lost you. You can hear me still, yeah?
Yeah, can hear you.
Ah, great. Okay, so yeah, I'm the director of organization. Well, essentially, it's a network called Tunawiri Grassroots Gender Justice Network. And what we do is we try to work with grassroots organizations focused on gender and social justice to help them create more impact in their communities. So whatever way we can step in terms of support or advocacy support or amplifying their campaigns or technical support, we try and do that. We're very young, but we started strong. So what we're doing on this particular issue is one, we are working with organizations grassroots organizations that focus on sexual and gender-based violence and helping support some of their causes like Usikimia. But we are also running a campaign called Zuia Zogo. So Zuia Zogo, basically an advocacy campaign on sexual and gender-based violence that pushes for the funding and support of women's shelters, proper referral and reporting systems, safer quarantine facilities for women and girls and children, and just like looks holistically at the issue of government's approach to sexual and gender-based violence. So that's what we've been doing, particularly on this issue.
Okay, awesome. Next, we'll go to Caroline Nana.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pastry, for inviting us to this event. My name is Caroline Nganga, and I work for Trocare. Trocare is an international organization that has its roots back in Ireland. We have a couple of countries in which we are represented, and Kenya is one of them. So our areas of interventions they cut across a couple of goal areas, but the main ones are on resource rights and youth. And then the one that brings us here today is, we call it Goal 3. It's on women's empowerment. So in women's empowerment, we are looking at, first of all, giving women power, voice, agency, ability to make decisions over their lives. And you do that through a couple of strategies. Then in the second area, still in women's empowerment, it's around sexual and gender-based violence, which is the key thing that we will be discussing today. And so we are looking at both prevention and response to sexual and gender-based violence. And you're working within the country, we are working in different areas, and particularly on women's empowerment, we are working in Nakuru County, mostly in the informal settlements. And then in Nairobi, we are in Kangemi, Mukuru, and a bit of Kibera. So that's Trocare for you, and we will get to know more about it as we continue. Thank you so much. And maybe I should also mention that we work through a partnership model. So we implement through different partners that are spread across the country. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Desmond Ogubi.
Yes.
Should I repeat the question?
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
No, you don't have to repeat the question. I got it. So my name is Desmond Ogubi. I'm an artist and an artist manager. Basically, I work for an organization called Anika Initiative, where I'm more into operations and project management. I'm here in the capacity of an artist, but at Anika we find ways on how to use art for advocacy and community development, and working with a lot of communities here in Kenya, Rwanda, and Burundi. So yeah, I hope that we're going to have an amazing time, and let's see what we have here.
Great, awesome. Now, Alex, you've joined us a few minutes ago. We are basically on question 1, which is people basically introducing themselves and telling us what the organizations do, so that you can catch on. I'm going to allow Wanjiru Njeri to tell us who she is and the work she does. Wanjiru Njeri.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. As you've heard, my name is Wanjiru Njeri. I am an artist, a poet, a content creator, and I run a program called Elimika na Uwajibike. It's a program for young teenagers aged 13 to 19 years of age, where we talk about what they go through, what is happening in their bodies, about sex, and basically we cover sex a lot and drugs and how to abstain and stuff like that. So that is what I'm currently doing, and I'm based in Nairobi County. That is where we are working. We are a still young organization. I just founded it a few months ago. So I hope we'll be growing, and I'll be partnering with some of you. Yeah, and I hope it's going to be an interactive and educative session as well.
We hope so as well. Alex, tell us, what organization do you work for, and like what work are you involved in?
Thank you so much, Nyakundi, and morning, everyone. My name is Alex Kambi. I work with the Kenya Community Media Network. I believe maybe some of you know it. We basically work in the circles of community media, and to be specific, it's community radio stations, community newsletters, community theater groups. We basically do networking, capacity building, content development, and policy advocacy with regards to these media groups, community media groups that I've mentioned. At this particular time, we are currently working on radio messages for campaign, for COVID-19 campaign. We call it COVID-19 awareness raising and fact-checking campaign. That is what we are doing currently, because as we speak, there is a lot of misinformation that is going on about COVID-19, especially in the grassroots media. And we come up with fact checks about all those misinformation needs and misconceptions, and then we retract those information back to the community through factual information. That aside, we also do some bit of publication in terms of posters and even animated messages on COVID-19, which are published on community radio websites and also social media channels. So basically, that is what we are doing for the moment.
Awesome, great. That's as you can see, the panel is packed with people with layers and layers of experience, from media to advocacy to policy, and a whole host of issues that are pertinent to the topic that we're going to be discussing today. So I want to give a brief interjection, because at some point we will have another gentleman joining us for this discussion. He's currently having a few issues with his connection, but I am told that he's going to be joining us in very few minutes. His name is Kasim. Kasim is in Kwale County, and is doing a marvelous job down there in the county. And so mkimwona akiingia, msishtuke huyu ni nani. He will introduce himself as well. At this moment, I'd like to also allow Atieno, my very able co-host, to introduce herself so that everybody knows her.
Hi, everyone. I think I got lost for a while there. My name is Atieno. I am an artist. I am a lawyer. I am also a founder of an organization called Refugee Poet, which is an organization that uses art to tell refugee stories of trials and triumph. And for the purposes of today, I'm going to assist Robin in the moderation of this session. And perhaps just to our audience, you can always comment or ask questions that we are going to read as we go along. Thank you, Robin.
A few of the panelists have joined in and left. I'm sure they'll be joining us back again in a few minutes. But I want to jump straight into the discussion. I'll head over to you, Caroline. Caroline, please tell us, what is the connection between your current job and your personal life experience in line with today's conversation?
Okay, thank you so much. I must say that today is an exciting day. We'll be discussing something that I'm very passionate about. I've been in this work from way back in 2006. I started in Dadaab refugee camp, so you're working with refugee women and girls, and then later I came into Nairobi where we've been working with mostly informal settlements, so urban setup. But taking it back to myself personally, I think that's a very exciting question, because we say that if you're working on sexual and gender-based violence, you must start by reflecting on yourself, your values, yourself, your experiences, before you can actually bring change to people's lives. So according to myself, most of the time we do not have information, we lack awareness. So even when violence happens to us, we do not pick it at that point as violence. But later, when you get a lot of knowledge, then you start remembering things that happened to you and realize I was actually violated, but I did not realize it. For example, if I was in a relationship and my boyfriend was asking me for money for their own use, without really being considerate to me, like they're just taking my money and putting it into their own use, that is economic violence. So that has happened to me in the past. But that time I did not know it was violence. Sometimes you're boarding a matatu and this matatu guy comes and hugs you forcibly. At that point, you didn't know it was violence, but today I know that is violence. And as we look at the statistics, we say that in every 3 women, 1 woman has gone through a form of violence, in any form of or shape of violence. So I count myself among those women. And yes, I relate with it, and I'm also very passionate with the groups you're working with. At Stroker, we're working with adolescent girls and young women, 15 years to 24. And I've had my co-panelists here also working with similar categories of women, and we relate with a lot of cases that are going on. So I'm quite in sync with today's conversation and the topic at a personal level, but also at a professional level. Thank you so much.
Wanjiru Njeri, I want to loop you in at some point after this round of introductions, because I know you have a very interesting take that is extremely personal to yourself, why you do what you do. So I want you to allow me to go to Nafula and then to Alex, and then I finish off with you for this particular question.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, so Nafula, you had left us for a minute, but then the question I was asking was, what is the connection between your current job and your personal life experience in line with today's discussion?
I'm a survivor as well, just like she mentioned, and I started working in this space in 2013, and so it's been years of just working in the gender-based violence. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's been years of working in this space, working with survivors, learning, healing, and I'm incredibly passionate about it. And yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Alex, you had told us that you work with a network of communities and media and radio. Tell us from your own experience, personal experience, what is the connection between this personal experience you have for yourself and the work you do in line with today's conversation, Alex?
Sorry, I didn't hear you well, Nyakundi. If you can come again.
Okay, let me repeat. So the question is, what is the connection between your current job and your personal life experience in line with today's discussion?
Oh, okay. So just like I mentioned before, we we work with community media groups in the areas of capacity building and content development. And with regards to our discussion today, I'd say that some of the content that we are producing and which are being disseminated by the radio station are touching on issues to do with gender-based violence. They are touching on issues to do with mental health and psychosocial support. And they also touch on issues to do with livelihoods now that COVID-19 has to some large extent affected livelihoods of so many people. So content-wise, I think we're just doing what we're used to do even before COVID, but it's just that now our shift or our focus has shifted to COVID-19 kind of content that can be used to address some of these issues which are happening within the community.
Okay, great. So, ladies and gentlemen joining us in this live stream today, this is actually a penultimate discussion of the series of discussions we've been having for the past 2 days. And I want to bring in Wanjiru Njeri to give us her own account of the things she has gone through, because she is a survivor. And I'll just let her speak for herself. So Wanjiru Njeri, please, this is your
Thank
time.
you for that. So this is quite personal. It's really, really personal to me. Since I got pregnant at 16. And so I gave birth at 17. That meant that I had to drop out of school for me to go through the process of giving birth. And so after I gave birth at 17, I gave birth again at 18. My kids are just 10 months apart. And it was really crazy and very ashaming. You know, when you're underage and they're just giving birth. And they're just giving birth. And for me, I did not know anything about contraceptive. I did not know anything about that. So immediately after I gave birth to my second baby, I I had to get married to the person who we had signed with. So I rushed into marriage at 18, where I got abused. Enough, I stayed in that marriage for only 4 months. 4 months. And I had to speak out because the person was just beating me every now and then. He even tried killing me. It was just a bad ordeal where I was being beaten in front of my babies. And I was afraid because of what the community would say. You know, I wanted to paint this perfect marriage, that even though I got babies while I was still young, I could still have a family and have a home that is complete. So I tried to persevere that, but it got to a point where That was not good at all. And even after after I left that marriage, it was still crazy because this guy used to follow me and harass me everywhere. Like right now, I just have police reports, some harassment that even if he tries touching me, he knows there's no way for him. But you see, after that, after everything that I went through, I decided not to give up and I decided to speak out and tell, one thing, what I tell my parents when I'm having these sessions with their children, that we should stop living in denial. These kids are having sex. As much as we try preaching, as much as we try telling them what and what, for them it sounds as cliche. For me, it sounded as cliche when you're told, don't have sex, don't do this and this and this. And it taught me that you will have to go down to their level. That's why it's so easy for me to get to these kids. I've saved a lot of girls, yeah, and even young boys from from indulging into early sex. So that is what I decided to do after my ordeal with having two babies under 18, and at under 18 still a survivor of domestic violence. And I get to share these stories on my YouTube channel, which is Wanjiru Njeri. I get to share that, and I get to help these kids by telling them what I've been through. And I just tell them I'm an example they can learn from. They don't have to be me. They don't have to go through what I've gone through. And I might have been lucky that I spoke out. Not everyone speaks out. You see. Yes, that's my personal experience with the topic at hand today.
Great. Thank you so much for that. It sets the pace. It sets the pace for the nature of the discussion I want us to really dive into extensively today. But now, on the issues that we want to demystify by the time we're done with this discussion are things like sexual harassment, rape and defilement, incest. We need to know what is sexual harassment. Can rape and defilement and incest be treated as forms of sexual harassment? Why? Yeah. Today in the morning, I was coming in a matatu to where I am right now, and there was a story on the radio about a pastor who had defiled or impregnated a form two child, a form two girl. And this is again in the backdrop of the previous day, a story of a child who was being molested by their parents. So really, incest is alive, incest is with us. Over and above the question of rape, which is already a hard thing to fathom or to take in, there are a few other things that are really not being talked about, and I'd like us to focus a bit more on them. So I'll shoot this question to Nafula Wafula. Nafula Wafula, what is sexual harassment? Can rape, defilement, and incest be treated as forms of sexual harassment? Why?
So sexual harassment is any unwanted attention, unwanted touching, using lewd words or sexual connotations that is unwelcome or unwanted. And it happens in different spaces. A lot of it happens at home. In the office, in the workplace, not just offices, but in the workplace. Street harassment can also be a form of sexual harassment, and it could also happen at home. But basically, it's that unwanted touching, unwanted comments or sexual comments, or just anything of a sexual nature that is not welcomed or wanted by the recipient. Defilement is anything sexual acts within where the persons are related. Yeah. Incest doesn't recognize consent. So whether you're two adults or it's a child and an adult, If there is blood relation, then it is an incestuous relationship and it is illegal. Now, incest occurs a lot, especially affecting children. Child sexual abuse happens a lot within the confines of incestuous relationships, because you find that a lot of children are molested by a person that they know. More often than not, it is a relative. It's a parent, it's a grandparent, because according in African culture, generally we always have relatives streaming in and out of homes, and so you all have so many stories of children who have been touched, molested, or defiled, which is when a child is raped, or when an adult, a person over the age of 18, has sex or sexual contact with a child or a person who's under the age of 18. Again, it doesn't recognize consent. So the intersection is that a lot of child sexual abuse cases happen within the context of incest, and it is really taboo. We don't talk about it enough, and that's why it goes on as much as it does, because if it is a grandfather that is touching a grandchild, who is going to talk about it? It's really taboo as is. So a lot of them are addressed at community level in their homes, or kept hush hush. Many of them don't go to court because of the fear that it'll break the family. But as we do that, we're causing a lot of harm and damage to our children. Thanks.
Okay. Does anybody feel like they want to add anything? It's such a heavy topic. All of you look like you're not even smiling. You smile at it.
Yeah,
So
I think I can add to say that all those forms of violence involve the concept of power. So where there is a difference of power, like a child, like she's saying, a child and a grandfather, you can't question. If it's your employer and they're asking for sexual favors, you're afraid that if I complain or if I report them, then I'm going to lose my job. So the position you are in as a recipient puts you in a subordinate position, a vulnerable position, and so you're not able to speak out. So this goes on and on and on and on, and people suffer in silence. So the concept of power is quite important to reflect there, because it cuts across as the underlying cause of all forms of sexual and gender-based violence. Thanks.
we've talked about sexual harassment. We've talked about rape, defilement, and incest, and it has been extensively defined. I don't think anything can be added onto what Wafula has already told us. But I still feel like there's is there a gray area between what defilement is and what sexual assault is and what rape is? Are they the same thing? I still feel like there's a bit of confusion between these three terms because they're used almost always loosely to mean the exact same thing. So can you break that down for us? I'd like to direct this to Caroline. Caroline.
So you said the difference between sexual assault,
So like when we define
defilement, and
yes,
rape.
yes,
So
yes.
first of all, our friend on this will be the Sexual Offences Act. We actually have the Sexual Offences Act of 2006, which has been undergoing review, but it's still a strong document that has very good provisions for governing sexual violence. So it defines clearly all those. Sexual assault is when I won't use the verbatim definition, but at least I'll explain what I know. Sexual assault is when the perpetrator uses anything but their private parts. So, for example, if I use an object or other parts of my body that are not private, like if I use my hands, a bottle, animal parts to penetrate or touch another person, the survivor, then that is sexual assault. So the difference there is the use of private parts. Defilement and rape, they are the same. The difference is age, because defilement is forced sexual intercourse to children, while rape is forced sexual intercourse to adults. and we say that children are 18 years and below, and they cannot consent, even if somebody says yes, even if I'm a schoolgirl, like Njeri was sharing and saying the way she was young and she got into this, into getting a baby and all that. A lot of people are saying these schoolgirls are looking beautiful and big and they want sex. These kids cannot consent. Then rape, of course, it's above 18 years, but then consent is not there. Sometimes people say that it's how we dress. Women, when women say no, they mean yes, but consent must be when I say yes, and I am. There are also other conditions around if somebody was drugged, if their mental status was okay or not okay. So we need to look at a lot of those things, and the Sexual Offences Act is very clear on the charges for each of those offences. My other colleagues can add, and I know we also have lawyers in the house, so we can add into that. Thank you so much.
Hey, does anybody want to add anything before we proceed?
Yeah, I think it's true. It's true. These terms are well defined in the Sexual Offences Act. But what got me a little bit puzzled is that part that talks about incest, and specifically because there are some cases which are considered incest, but they are not well captured in the Sexual Offences Act, like sex between first cousins. Mostly when you go to the court of law, that case will be probably thrown off because it's not backed, it's not supported by the Sexual Offences Act. I don't know if it's as a result of omission, intentional omission, or it is logical enough not to criminalize sex between cousins. Because there was this time when, I think it was in 2016, where this High Court judge, I think there was a case which involved sex between cousins, and this judge decided to rule out the case because that particular section touching on incest did not capture well which provisions of the law can be used to charge somebody who has committed sex between themselves and a cousin. But other parts, they've been well captured, like sex between kids, maybe the daughter, the father and the daughter, or the mother and the son. All those have been captured well. So that is the only area probably which I'd like to know, maybe from Carol, to know whether it's still applicable to date or the situation is still the same.
Yeah, maybe the lawyer in the house will help, because what I know is that it might not be included in the Sexual Offences Act, but as long as there is a direct blood relationship, then according to me it is incest. But my lawyer colleague can support with that.
You mean me?
Yes.
Yes,
Is there another lawyer? Yeah. Okay. I was hoping there was another one because I don't know.
Yeah.
I have not dusted my law books in a while, but I think the definition of what incest is quite wide. And it goes down to mentioning exactly what blood relations are interconnected. And so I don't know if you're right about the first cousins thing. You might be right. Again, like I haven't dusted my books in a while, and if there's a lawyer in the comment section in any those places that can just clarify that point for the rest of the guys, that would be awesome. But I also think over and above that, I think there's two things. One is we need to recognize that there's a major clash between our cultural practices and common law and religion. Like all these different things that are interconnected, yeah. So when you look at African traditional culture, you'd find that I think in some cultures, people were marrying. I mean, we still had taboo, laws against direct blood relation marriages and stuff, or this incestuous relationships. But I think the lines were a bit more blurred in some areas. But basically, what I'm trying to say is, again, not speaking as an expert on African culture, but uh, that the clash in the different laws or the different legal systems also has brought up this conversation around what an incestuous relationship is and what it is not. So some things were just downright taboo in African culture, and some things were a gray area, and then you find that common law is saying that it's a complete no-no, and then some things are just a complete no-no based on religion. Say Christian religion, polygamy is a no-no, but then in African culture it's allowed. So you look at issues of sex and sexuality and marriage and interrelationships, the clashes in different legal systems, I think also play an impact as to whether these issues are addressed or acceptable to community or not. And I think that's something that we don't really talk about enough in terms of behavior change. We expect it's just something, because something is in the Sexual Offences Act, which is a legal document, that it has an impact on that person, in that 70-year-old man in Marsabit, or just the ordinary Mwananchi, but we assume it will change their behavior, but we're not looking at other factors that are really, really strong at play as well, such as culture and religion.
Okay. Desmond is a student of history. I don't know if you have anything to add based on because an interesting the conversation has trickled into culture and taboos, which is actually my next question. But I'd like to see if there's any context you can add based on your understanding in your study of history and how structures were set up during when we were walking around in. I don't want to finish that statement, but Desmond.
Can I answer on the next question? Based on the next question. Thank you.
So the next question is, so we've talked about incest. Clearly, it is a problem we're having today. And I want us to try and explain to everybody who's watching, why is it a taboo and why is it important for us to have these conversations on incest? So I think I will go to Wanjiru Njeri.
What's the question again?
The question is why is it important to have conversations on incest included, and why is it a taboo to have these conversations right now? Because it's carried around like oh, don't talk about that, you can't say that, you can't talk about that here. Why is it important for us to have these discussions, and if we were to have them, how would we go about it?
According to me, I think just the way we say charity begins at home, these talks should begin at home. You see, when we create an environment where when anything happens, we can talk about it with our parents, with our sisters, with our, because I believe the reason as to why we cannot have these conversations, it started way back, way back, when you could not even go and tell your mom daddy is trying, you see, brother, maybe your brother is trying to touch you, or even your sister, because I've heard of even young boys who are being forced into doing sexual things with big girls. So I think it will start at home. Yeah, when you create a conversation with your child as young as they are, and teach them that nobody should touch them. The way we used to say, nobody should touch me and nobody should, you know, that song. It should happen at home. And whenever a child brings up this topic, I believe children are very innocent people who do not lie. Because the problem is that I've seen with most homes, whenever a child goes and try and tell their mom, so and so tried to touch me, or maybe it is the father, just because the father is the breadwinner of that family, the child is told to keep quiet, and it is wrong. It is wrong. So that notion of it being a taboo should first of all be wiped away. It is not a taboo. It is not a taboo to talk about anyone who is harassing you, anyone who is forcing you to do things that are not right. It is not a taboo when you talk about someone who is just not giving you peace, you see, because as Nafula said, it could be verbally, it could be physically. So first of all, if we want to heal this taboo thing, we have to get it into our minds and know it is okay to talk about it. And if a child approaches you, if you are the mother, if you are the father, if you are an elder in that family, I think it is very important for you to understand the child, for you to listen to the child, and for you to offer help as soon as you can. Because if we live with this notion, it is a taboo, we cannot talk about it, then I think we're just losing it day by day. And in for me to talk about right now, when you're having this pandemic at the moment, I work with organizations in the slums mostly, Madare, Kibera, Soweto, and most cases are incest. Most cases are incest. And I don't know if it's because these kids thought that they are having a safe place at school, and now at home, they're no longer in a safe space. And when the father tries to do something, the mother will cover it, because by the end of the day, this guy is a breadwinner. If we talk about it, if we speak about it, what will happen? And I'm glad because we have Usikimia that is coming to help a lot of people. So I think it is upon each of us to wipe away that notion of it being a taboo, and let the conversations begin at home. Yeah.
Alex, I want to bring you in with the same question. Your work with in the media space and in the community space. I don't know. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, okay. Your work, Alex, in the community and media space. How do you feel a message like this on such a conversation should be conveyed, so that the communities want to listen and like process the information on this topic, and probably unlearn a lot of what they feel is taboo to talk about?
Thank you very much, Yakundi. Maybe I can weigh in on the idea of incest being a taboo, or something that is not acceptable with regards to our traditions. And just to mention, initially, of course, this was a taboo. It was unheard of. It was deemed to be something that can bring you a curse if you engage in incest. Traditionally, people thought you would be cursed, or probably you'll even go insane. But in the days that we are living in, there's nothing to do with curses. There's nothing, no more beliefs on curse or people becoming insane because of engaging in incest. And probably that is one of the main reasons to why cases of incest are on the rise, because people now just engage in sex with no strings attached, and superstitious notions are no longer there. So people are no longer afraid of engaging in sex with people who they are closely related with. So with in the context of what we do in the content development area, probably what we can measure on is trying to come up with messages which are inclined more into human rights, because there's this tendency of communities terminating babies who are born out of cases of incest. For example, in the Bukusu community, kids born out of incest are usually killed. If not rescued early enough, they're usually killed. So probably what we might need to do is you cannot correct a wrong with a wrong. So what need to be done is efforts to safeguard life, because once somebody gets a kid, then that is a life already that is there. So terminating the life of that particular child might not be so good, might be against human rights law. So we might want to produce content that also seeks to safeguard life of those who are already who have already been born out of these kind of engagements, but also content that will encourage people not to engage in incest, because incest is incest, and a union that is of incest in nature is something that is not desirable, even in the context which we are living in at the moment. So yeah, that is probably what we can focus on for the moment.
So earlier on in the discussion, when we were starting, I had told you that we are going to be having a gentleman joining us, and fortunately he's already here. So I don't know if Katiba, you can hear us. Probably say hi. How are you, Katiba? Katiba Mkumu.
He's on mute.
Okay. Katiba Mkungu, can you hear us? Please unmute yourself. Okay, let's proceed, and then I'm having someone else helping him also, so that we sort that out. But then now, so we've talked about, I feel like we've extensively defined and given a bit of texture to the topic of sexual assault, defilement, incest, and rape. But then I want us to go a bit into the question of teenage pregnancies. So all these things we are talking about, sexual defilement, incest, rape, ultimately teenage pregnancy are a huge repercussion and consequence of these actions. But then, aside from being sexually assaulted, raped, or defiled, what are the factors that have led to the rise of teenage pregnancies? Maybe to add a bit of context to that question is, I'd say, yes, we know that these are the things that cause it to a large degree, but what other things are there present that are enabling an environment where teenage pregnancies are more prevalent? So that now we can begin to understand the how of how we can plug in to stop them. So I don't know if who feels they've understood my question, so that they can jump here. Going once, going twice.
I can.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so I'm going to give like an extensive answer based on what I think. So in terms of who, because I think there's a large conversation around who is responsible for the large number of teenage pregnancies happening right now. So I'd like to give and then I'd also like to at least connect all those different things you've talked about and how they can lead to an increase in teenage pregnancy. So one is, I think one of the reasons why teenage pregnancy is such a big issue right now is there's two things. One is a failure of the system to protect children, protect teenagers. So basically what's happened, especially during this COVID period, is that teens have just you've been dropped. School was a safe space for teenagers. They're no longer going to school. You're stuck at home with nothing to do because a lot of them cannot access education in any sort of way, because they don't have access to the internet, TV, radio. So the inequalities that exist within that space has meant that a large chunk of children have basically been left to cater for themselves at home. Yeah. So you're at home, you're a teenager, you're with a parent. Your parents need to go out and hustle. And we live in a world that is more sexually, there's more access to sexual information, and I don't mean relevant sexual information. Yeah. And our culture is also very sexualized as is, that the age at which young people, teenagers are interacting with sexuality is it's getting much younger and much younger. Yeah, even access to pornography is much younger. I'm not saying that is a sole cause of teenage pregnancy, but what I'm saying is that the sexual exposure is to teenagers is at a much younger age. For me, I think it's a failure of the system, and I still think it's an abusive scenario because at the end of the day, they're not adults, they're children. If they're accessing pornography, they are children. And we can't only look at consent within the context of we can't only say that whole issue of consent doesn't matter, only applies when it comes to defilement in terms of actual penetration and sex when a child is involved. I think it should cut across, otherwise we are being escapist. So we can't say that this teenager consensually went to their phone, consensually accessing pornography. If they're a teenager, as long as they are a child, it means the system needs to set up measures to ensure that they do not access it. So I think the system has failed. The system is blaming everyone but its failure. We're blaming parents. But I still think as a society or as community as a whole, as parents, we also have a role to play to ensure that this stuff doesn't happen. So by not having conversations with teenagers about sex and sexuality and seeing that as a taboo topic, what we're doing is we're creating a space where teens can't talk to us and they're only talking to themselves about sex and sexuality. And as they do that, they have more of it, because what sort of info are they getting? So if we don't have, right now, our environment, we don't have sexual information, sexual education, access to sexual reproductive health services, and that is an escapist perception that is only magnifying the problem as is. And the last thing is, and this is something that I've gotten to learn over time. The rates of child sexual abuse and molestation globally, but also in this country, are ridiculous. And research shows that childhood sex abuse or defilement or introduction to sexuality at a young age, one of the effects that it has is that it sexualizes a child's mind from a very young age. And therefore, sometimes when you go to school and you find girls, teenagers, or boys being overtly or overly sexual, what happens is we say they're bad children, or they watch bad things, but this child is slowly becoming an adult survivor of childhood sex abuse. And that sexualization is as a result of what happened as a child. So because we don't have proper mental health services, counseling, and we're not able to recognize childhood sex abuse, the ripple effect is that we are creating overly sexualized teenagers as adults because sexuality has been normalized at a very young age. So that's the connector. It starts from down there as children. And as they grow up, and even just have accessing phones that have information on sexuality, and they're 8, 9, 10 years old, 6 years old, seeing it on social, we are sexualizing their minds from a very young age. And that is abuse. And that's how it comes out, a generation of overtly or overly sexualized young people, children, and it affects people into adulthood, and that's what we don't talk about. I'm hoping that eventually you guys can just set up a topic on just effects of childhood sex abuse on adults, because a lot of what we are seeing with people today are effects of trauma and sex abuse that happened to them as children. That was a long answer. I apologize, but yeah.
There's no need to apologize. it's a very fitting answer. I don't know if anybody else has anything else they want to add.
Yeah.
Okay.
To add on what Nafula has just said, I think even poverty does play a big role in increasing teenage pregnancies because, for instance, some young girls have to have sex in exchange for them to get food or sanitary towels or even shelter. And I think when you have to exchange sex for a basic need, I think even the person doing that is not okay. It's not okay upstairs because that is really unfair and really uncouth. And these people do it knowingly and they do not even have safe sex with these children. They get to infect them or even leave them pregnant. So I think that is a factor that does increase teenage pregnancies. Uh, Yes. Yeah, yeah. So that is what I wanted to add on that, whatever Nafula has said.
Okay. Great. So the discussion started with definitions, and we went into uh, dispelling a few of the terms that interrelate or cross against each other. And now we have talked about teenage pregnancies. But now I want to approach a stakeholder angle and probably pose the question. When the system, Nafula has adeptly stated, and rightfully so, that there's a systems problem. And when there's a problem with, we have so many teenage pregnancies, the system blames another stakeholder, which will be now the parents. But now I want us to talk about parenting and parents and the role that they play, and maybe touch on the few intricacies that are associated with parenting, especially during this time. So the question I'd like to pose is: are our parents, what role do our parents play in the entire tapestry of this conversation? Because to many people, it feels like parents are on autopilot. So it's like, send the kids to school. When they're in school, the teachers will deal with them. I want nothing to do with them. But no, that's not possible. And so what we are having is probably a period of time where parents don't know how to relate to their own children, because a child may have gone to boarding school before they were in puberty. And right now they're stuck at home and they're already halfway through puberty. And now they don't know how to interrelate, they don't know how to have a conversation with them. So what role do really parents play? And how do we manage the consequences of the autopilot nature of the relationships that we've been having time and time again? I'm shooting that question to anybody who is willing to answer at this point. Caroline, you
Okay,
want to go?
yeah,
Okay.
maybe I can start and then my colleagues will also add. First of all, I want to thank
Okay.
Nafula and Jerry for the very comprehensive input they've put into it, and they've already actually spoken to a bit of it. Like when Nafula was talking about control, parental control, where is your child? Do you know what they are doing? Are you able to know what they are watching on their phones? When they lock their doors in the bedroom, what are they doing? Who are they meeting? And I can see there is actually input from people that are viewing about music that is being played around. We all know the content in Gengetone. It's really bad. So what can we do to control that? Because everybody has a role. Parents have a role. The government has a role. Each and everyone has a role, and we must employ a multi-sectoral approach to be able to address this, so that our laws are implemented, but also ourselves at our personal level can do something. So for parents, there's that part of control, but also instilling values in your children. For example, I'm a mother of one boy, 3 years. Having seen what is happening to girls now, and even boys are being violated, I'm hoping that I can be openly talking to my child. I know it's not easy. As they grow older, it becomes hard, but I'm up to the task. I want to really make it very deliberate that I'm telling him this is right, this is wrong, and trying to hold their hand so that they can have that positive value based system, and also teaching them about healthy relationships so that we can have this conversation become part of us. Since what has happened right now, we have normalized what is wrong and it is looking fine, which is really unfortunate, and it is really, really costing us. So we must talk to our children, we must take responsibility as parents, and we must try to control what they are accessing and what they are able to do. And if everybody does that, we're going to be successful. And as I finish, I want to mention or to refer to a video that I saw circulating. It's by Mutula Jr. He's speaking to sexual violence and how and teenage pregnancies and how we are taking action. Are we taking these people to court? Are we making sure that prosecution is done completely? Are we, even if it's your uncle that did it, don't keep quiet. Just proceed, take action, and others will be able to learn from it. And all of us being champions into this action. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Anybody else wants to add anything before I proceed?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. You go first.
Okay, Alex.
honestly, what I can say is for parents, because with the changes in the environment, sometimes you cannot control what is happening in the environment. What you're seeing in the music industry, what you're seeing in the advertisements, what you're seeing out there in the secular world, it's a world that is changing. There are new things which are coming. There are issues which are coming up. There are many things which are happening out there, and some of them we don't have any control. For example, on what goes on the internet, because internet, as somebody says, is a jack of all of all trades. You can find anything on the internet, and sometimes you cannot even control what goes on the internet. In as far as there are efforts which are being put in place to regulate or to censor content that is available on the internet. So that means what is needed is honest conversation between the parent and the child, because that is the only thing that can be able to help this person not to engage probably in early sex intercourse. Because if they don't do this, then these kids will not find the right motivation not to do this. So it all lies in these honest conversations where parents can sit down with the kids and explain to them, yes, there's this kind of music playing, but what are you learning out of content-wise? What are you learning from this music that is playing? Again, if you engage in what is being depicted in this music, what do you think will happen of you? So it's this conversation comes from the parent, then the child will be able to alert herself not to engage in such kind of vices, because that is what will lead to probably pregnancy or anything that might not be so appropriate for that child at that particular time.
So first of all, I have not had Desmond's voice the whole time. I'm just like, what? So I'm going to say something really fast because I'd really like to hear what he has to say. But I think, well, for me, I think the most important thing is, this has been mentioned before. I think communication is vital. So unfortunately, we live in a capitalistic world, and capitalism is not exactly family friendly. The amount of time you spend at work and outside the home is much more than the amount of time you spend at home with your family or your children, because you have to survive. And now we don't have jobs. COVID has completely screwed up the world, like monumental ways. So now people don't have jobs, people have to go and hustle. And the reality is we live in a world where, and if we do not speak realistically about the inequalities we have in society and how these play a role in the protection that children have, then we're lying. Yeah. So if that mother in Madari has to go out and hustle, and she cannot afford childcare, there's COVID, kids are at home, she's going to lock them up in the house or tell a neighbor to watch the child. And it's not because she doesn't want to, it's because she has no option. But we also have, honestly, just parents that are just distant from their children. So I think it's important, one, to recognize the systemic challenges that exist that are outside the control of parents that would like to do better but cannot. But I think as much as we can, creating that safe space for children is incredibly important, and it needs to start at a very young age. And that's where we have a problem, because we introduce the topic of sexuality in a very awkward manner when the girl is 13 or the boy is 13, and they are starting to grow kidogo, and then you're like and kupate uko nje. So sex is always demonized, and we don't talk about it like it's a regular process, that this girl as she grows up, or this boy as he grows up, will be a sexual being, and there's changes in their body, and they'll find themselves sexually attracted. So as long as you demonize sex, how are your kids supposed to talk to you about it when they're having issues? And I think that is the problem. We need to teach babies, little kids, we need to teach kids what their sexual parts are. A 4-year-old boy should know that no one should touch my penis. A 4-year-old girl should know no one should touch my vagina. What is a good touch? What is a bad touch? Should I tell a grown-up on how to say no? I feel unsafe, stay away, how to use a strong, deep voice, or a voice that comes from here. Those are things that we should be able to talk to our children about. But as long as we use the word tabia mbaya or bad manners to refer to sex and sexuality when talking to children, when it happens, they will feel guilty because they will feel like they are doing bad manners and it's being done on them. So I think terminology and words and openness in talking about these issues is important, and always checking in on our children at the end of the day. How was your day? What happened? How did you feel? That's going to be very, very important to create that safe space for children, and even as they grow up into teenagers, to be able to say, someone touched me inappropriately, or when they are 13, 14 years old, to say, this boy touched me like this and it felt kind of good and I don't know what to do. So for me, the big issue is just making sure that sexuality is not a taboo, and that we can talk about it from a very, very young age with our children. Yeah.
Awesome, great. I want to bring in this one, but before that, I'd like to also put my co-moderator Atieno on. Atieno will be taking us through a few of the comments. I'm seeing the comment section is alive. People are sharing opinions and giving comments on how they are feeling the conversation is going on. But there's a question that has been posed, and I see we've already picked up on it when we were discussing music. The last time, a few weeks ago, there's a music group in the country that released a song with lyrics that were promoting pedophilia and I think to a certain degree incest. And I remember talking to Wafula and asking her what she thought about it, and we had an interesting exchange of comments. But ultimately, it led to myself bringing up, writing down a post on social media that was shared extensively, and ultimately it led to having the music pulled down. So the distance between what we can do and what needs to be done is not big. People want to imagine that when speaking up and speaking out is for people in the civil society sector, people who are known to be advocates or lawyers and stuff. But anybody really can speak up and speak out and can have effective change made. So right before I bring Atieno, I want to have Desmond talk to us. Desmond is an artist. Desmond has managed so many events and conversations on sexual and gender-based violence, sustainable development goals, gender equality. Generally, from my relationship with the work that he has been doing, I want him to take us through a performance. I understand, Desmond, you have a performance for us today. So, take a few minutes and preach to us your gospel. We can't hear you, Desmond. We can't hear you.
Yes, I just realized that. Yeah, so someone mentioned that I was quiet for so long. The reason is because I didn't know how to come in. Since I was invited as an artist, and I knew the people who are on the panel are very smart and brilliant people, and I'm sure anyone watching can actually tell that by now. And most of the time, how they answered questions, it was exhaustive. I didn't find a reason why I should even say anything. Most of them are practitioners, so they have first-hand experience. But there was a point that was raised earlier on role of culture and history and how that can be translated into addressing issues that are affecting us right now. And I feel like we have never been taught African history. Our books don't teach us African history. They teach us history that a colonizer wrote for us from their own point of view. So we tend to go with that and fight our own heritage instead of actually understanding the true history we come from. And because, for example, when you take an issue like incest, yes, of course, a few years ago, incest was not a big issue. Because 80,000 years ago, a woman who was an African bore kids, and from there we started becoming the people that we are. The migration from some of those people went to the Aboriginal region in Australia. Some of them went to Europe, and due to climatology and over the years, they turned into white people that you see. They had to adopt into cultures that were favoring the areas that they were in today. And because of that, at that point, incest was the only thing that could actually sustain generations. But then as community expanded and they had to different laws and rules had to be set up to accommodate. And that's why when the legalization, so to speak, of issues of ancestry came in. But I'm also sure that most of you guys have read a lot of slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade and all that. So that's the time when the migration started and people started moving from Africa, they'll tell you the Bantus where they moved from, the Nilotes where they moved from. And at that point, because of the movement, a lot of families broke up. And one of another thing, the incest element came in. It came up because as a Luya man, I have moved all the way from Congo, and the only woman that actually made it to where I am is my small sister. So we had to start a generation, and that's how incest started being a thing that we are actually seeing today. Anyway, so if at all we are able to start understanding from the point of where the issues began, it's very easy to handle most of these issues. And Robin, when you did the article, I told you that it's actually good that artists are right now talking about these issues. And you're like, why? And this is the reason. They say the artist is a mirror of the society. So they say, Msaneni kioo cha jamii. I'm just doing a transliteration. So if the artist is the said mirror of the society, the artist is good, and I'm sure, Wanjiro, you're an artist, and probably, correct me if I'm wrong, Robin, correct me if I'm wrong, we write because of things that are around us. The other time when you wrote about it, it's because that's what had come at you. When I write about sexual and gender-based violence, it's because of what I experience. Yeah, so most of the time we are talking about issues that actually are happening. And this society, we have not accepted that. We have total moral decadence, and that most of our policies actually don't really inform our cultural, socio-economic socialization process, and because of that there's a very big gap actually when it comes to implementation. Sasa tuko na issues mingi just because the law implementers most of the time they're just copy pasting something from Europe that looks so cool and it worked there, and then when they bring it here it doesn't actually work. So the thing is, morality in this country is on a low. These kids who are writing these songs, that's how they grew up. That's how they grew up, seeing women being treated in their families. And that's the only way that they know. They say you can't teach what you don't know, you know? So that is where we are. And if we need to address most of these issues, as Wanjiro and Afula have said, the socio-economic element of this whole tandem cannot be looked down upon. We need to start addressing issues from the family setting. But then, if my dad works kilometers away, my mom works kilometers away, I live in the slum, and my role model is the guy who sells weed across the road, how do I know any better, you know? The only thing that I see people around me who are older than me do is the exact thing that I'm going to do thereafter. So we need to, these are conversations that people are not having, and I'm happy that we're actually having some of these conversations. And anyway, I'm an artist. I wasn't supposed to give lectures here. So I will go straight into what brought me here and probably see if at all I'll be able to contribute thereafter. Anika, that's the organization I work for. And when we started off, we were a group of artists who had either been sexually violated or have gone through very abusive homes. And that's how we started. So we wanted to have conversations because most of the time we were having those conversations, but we couldn't. We wanted to expand it more to other people to come in and have similar conversation and create small communities of people like us, people who are going through whatever we are going through. And I don't know. I've never even told. Robin is my best friend. I've never told even this. Yeah. So the first time that I faced this, I don't know if it was sexual violence, but the only thing I know is that I was less than 10. I was 6, and I wasn't in a position to make a sober decision. That's the first time I think I had sex. I don't know if it was sex because I realized it was sex later on. 10 years or so later, like after. But a house help had sex with me. I don't remember much, but I remember how when it dawned on me how I felt. I felt used. I felt like a piece of shit. I felt like a lot of things, you know? And when these things most of the time happen, most of the time when you realize or when it dawns on you, you always tend to blame yourself. And if you don't have a support system that is strong enough around you, I don't know, that's how people go through suicides in such cases. And I've always had a big team around me, and they have always been very supportive. So just to finish this off, I'm happy that you're having the conversation. I'm going to go straight into the piece that I had for today. It was written around 5 years ago, and I had written this because I wrote it with someone, and we were going through a lot of things at the time. I lost my grandmother, who was my best friend, and so I wrote the piece for women. So it's simply called "For the Strong," and it goes, you see, women, you are the prefix to our first breath, and you breathe sunshine on days that are darker than the Great Depression. You whisper floodlights. When rolling blackouts disconnect the power to our dreams, you say, men, we are like towers erected over crowded streets. Women, you're like the steel beams in the building that hold us in place, but often we forget that we can't stand without you. Sometimes we just don't remember that you hold the key that opens the entrance to this earth. We openly worship these earthly things instead of the gatekeeper that opens the door to let us in. So this poem is for the strong. This is for every woman who know that it's far better to be single than to have a man that will never understand your worth. This is for the women who are not afraid to cut a man loose if he's not doing his job. This is for the women who get hated on by girls with insecurities tattooed to their faces. Sweetheart, they hate you. They hate you because their confidence is crippled. They got handicapped thoughts and their self-esteem has never, ever been in any way compliant. This is for the strong. This is for every woman who will never dance half naked in a hip hop video because they understand how sacred their bodies are. This for the women who look in the mirror and see the closest thing on this earth to God. I said this is for the women who remind me of my mother. You see, I was told that feminism is just an underground railroad to masculinity, that real men have turned over and treated girls like subway cars, like nothing more than a space to park our genitals, a hole to bear fruits and leave orchards. They say that you're gonna peel a woman like a tangerine when your job as a man is to chameleon yourself into her trees, buy a piece of fruit and leave the dress hanging, damaged and confused. This is an apology to every woman that I've changed colors to get inside of. You see, I haven't still stumbled across the definition of men, but I know that we are hotels standing a million more stories tall. I know that we carry guitar cases full of phobias, hoping that we can turn fear into our strongest instrument. I know that our hands break things just as frequent as we fix them. But we often forget that sexism is a family trait that we have been passing down for generations. So if you think this world wasn't built for you, you tear it to the ground, resurrect it in your image, and make sure that it's just as beautiful as you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Desmond, for that interesting take on the issues that we are discussing and that very touching performance. I know the comment section is already alive with a lot of input. So I want to hand over this particular point of the discussion over to Atieno. Atieno, if you can hear me. Hello, Atieno. Atieno, okay. We seem to
Yes, Robin, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you. Okay, Atieno, over to you. Take us through.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So, I would like to apologize because you guys can't see me. My internet is really acting up, and so I've figured that if I switch off my video, my audio is gonna be better. So I'll just go straight into the comment section, and we have the first question from Toonhood, who asks, "What steps should be taken to people who abuse their relatives who are akili pungwani sexually, ama wana rape, then the family covers that?" Answer this for us.
Yes, I think I actually even mentioned when we were starting that a lot of time when we talk about consent, it becomes more sensitive for the more vulnerable the recipient is. I mean, the more vulnerable the recipient is, the more careful we should be. And so people with mental illnesses, most of the time, like all the time, they cannot make decisions. They cannot make informed decisions because of the level of their mental ability, and we really need to take care of them. And what we are seeing is that the level of vulnerability is very, very high. They're not able to speak for themselves. They're not able to come out, and we really need to be there for them. So the challenge we have is that most of them are hidden at home. When this happens, they will not speak, and even the people that are surrounding them do not want that reported because it will bring shame, it will bring stigma, and then the perpetrators do not want to be prosecuted. But in the Sexual Offences Act, it is very, very clear that that is sexual violence, and the charges are very clear, the provisions are quite clear, and that should be apprehended, that should be followed. So what I think we should do is to really pass information out there so that people know, and so that we all take a responsibility of speaking out. For example, if the family that is involved is not speaking out, but then we have neighbors there, we have friends to those families, we have the Nyumba Kumi initiative. We need to be there for each other, because today it's my family that's having that challenge, and tomorrow it's another family. So if that case is reported and the necessary measures taken to apprehend the perpetrators, then tomorrow people are going to learn, and that will not be reported. So the main thing there is reporting, speaking out, and supporting the survivor, and also the family where the survivor is coming from. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caroline. I don't know if any of you wants to add anything, or I can go to the next question. Okay.
Just to add,
So we
sorry.
have another question here from Spontaneous, and
I think Alex wanted to add something.
Go ahead, Alex.
Sorry, I think I was not audible enough. But just to mention on the administration of justice bit, that anyone who commits an offense, sexual offense, against person who has a mental illness or doesn't have any sound judgment, then it should be treated as the same offense somebody can commit towards a minor, because those two are more of vulnerable. They don't have the ability to say yes or no because of their state. One who is an infant doesn't have an idea of what is happening, and the one who has mental illness, who doesn't have the right judgment to know what is happening. So if those two judgments can be clustered as the same, then it can serve the best in terms of administration of justice is concerned. Thank you. Back to you, Nyakundi.
Thank you. I will move on to the next Spontaneous, and she asks this, and I would like to direct this one to Nakula. She asks, at what age do you feel we should engage our children in sex education? And perhaps tie this with another question. What
Is it just me, or I can't really hear?
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Atieno, I think your internet is having issues.
In that education, what is the content?
So I didn't even hear that last part.
Atieno,
I
could you
don't know.
repeat
I
the
think
question, please?
Okay, so I don't think Atieno is with us. Okay. The question I believe she was asking was, at what age do you feel we should engage our children in sex education? No?
Yeah, I think she's trying to add something to it, but that's okay. I'll just answer that. So research
Okay.
from there's research from other countries, particularly I think it's Scandinavian countries, should be Sweden, that interconnects the value of age appropriate sexuality or sexual education with rates of teenage pregnancy and stuff like that. Yeah. And there is a decline. Like, the more we talk to children about sex and sexuality, the more they are aware, the more they make decisions that are good, appropriate decisions. We more often than not, we assume that talking to children about sex makes them want to have sex, but that's like saying, if I talk to you about, it's like me explaining to you the importance of wearing a seatbelt. It doesn't mean that I'm preparing you to like, it doesn't mean I want you to run into an accident, you know? So you're not just going to drive badly because ha 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 ha, now I know how to wear a seatbelt. I am going to crash into that truck to see if it works. It's a ridiculous connotation. And so when we say that if we're going to teach our children about sexuality, that they will want to have sex, it's as ridiculous as the other example I've given. So when we teach our children about sex and sexuality, we are equipping them with information that will help them make the right decisions and choices. Because whether we like it or not, they are sexual beings, and sexuality begins at a very, very young age. The moment they recognize I have a penis, the girl has a different sexual part. Why is that? Or if I touch myself here, or if someone touches me here, it starts early. So if we don't talk to them about these things that are happening to them that early on, they're caught by surprise. And then it's now some sick bastard out there that is teaching them that this is, your body will feel good, or you'll get a good feeling if I touch you here. It catches them by surprise. So I think, for me, personally, I don't have children, but I advocate for as early as possible, but making it age appropriate, because as they grow up, then their questions and their minds around sexuality form differently, and they have deeper and deeper questions. Yeah. And now, today, honestly, a 13-year-old will ask you about polyamory, and that's not a question a 13-year-old would have asked you like 3-4 years ago. But I think it's important to have those conversations, because then they'll just see it on the internet or elsewhere on live on pop culture and stuff. So I think age appropriate sexuality education and sexuality conversations are incredibly important. I think they need to happen at home, but I think it's a shame that they don't happen in school, because children are spending more time outside the home than they are in the home. And so when we don't have teachers telling class 2-3-year-old, this is what this is, and if someone touches you here, this is bad, then it means, honestly, we are sending our children out into a war zone without any sort of protection.
Okay, great. Just to add a bit on that, when I was doing a bit of background reading for this particular discussion, I happened to come across a study on the effects of pornography on 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 how people, especially children, perceive sex. Yeah, and so the study was actually saying that in the past 15 years, pornography has been increasingly more and more violent. It went on to describe a great deal of how the trajectory on violence has been slowly instilled in the different productions as the years have gone by. And then it went again ahead to like draw a parallel between what that has meant for the society, its perceptions on sex, and what the role of men and women in sex is progressively from the same period of time, 15 years ago, leading onwards towards now. Then he gave an account of how these different activities have ultimately increased a great agitation towards or the experience of sex and stuff like that. So I'm imagining a situation whereby a child doesn't get taught on what sex is, and they through some way, out of no fault of their own and out of pure curiosity, they land on pornography as a teacher of choice who is readily available because of access to technology and devices and internet, and a lot of copious amounts of time to themselves. And so how that kind of violence can be taught to them, and then they attach that as the adequate and true definition of what a sexual experience should be, and then they begin to look out for that even as they engage and grow, learning about sex and its different experiences. So I feel like we need to have a deeper conversation on sexual education, and so that people unlearn the notion that teaching these things in schools is teaching children how to have sex, because children are already having sex. Like, you'd be very shocked how many children are having sex, and it's so casual, it's so kawaida, they've already normalized it. For them it's like, you people don't do this, as we've been doing this. And so basically, yeah. So back to the comments. We have Morina Kinyi. Morina Kinyi says that there is a lot of talks about sex and self-awareness. Teachers and parents need to engage children at school and at home. Peace Tree Network says, thank you for sharing your story with us. That's at Desmond Ogubi. We also have Isabella Kirote says, a wonderful conversation. Desmond Ogubi, what a hearty piece. There's a lot of love in the comment section. Rick's poet says, the more we know, the better we do. Yes, and so I want us to move. I don't know, my co-moderator seems to have had a really bad technical fallout with her devices, but we are on the last leg of this conversation. And I'd like us to, we've talked about sexual education. We have established that it is relevant. We have extensively broken down different issues that are attached to why people are against it and the taboos associated with it being adopted. But now I want us to talk about how we can assist people facing forms of violence as individuals. Um, people, I said earlier on today that people have the assumption that advocacy and speaking up on these issues is something that a lawyer should do, or somebody known to be a human rights activist should do. But ultimately, in a society, these people are not accessible all the time. Yeah, if I said that Nafula Wafula is going to be the only person who is capable of speaking up against child marriages and GBV, then a lot of people will miss out on justice and accountability and stuff like that. So I want to pose the question to you, honorable members of my panel. How do we plug in as individuals? Mtu pale mashinani, what can they do? Are there helplines you know of? What procedure? If I meet somebody today mwenye ameabusiwa, what do I tell them when they ask me what should they do? Because understandably they won't be in their correct state of minds. So how can I begin to help? I want to start with Caroline.
Okay, thank you so much for this question, and I'm happy to answer because it's what we've been doing for a long time. So before we even go to what should be done or steps to take if abuse happens, the first thing I want us to look at is the survivor-centered approach in assisting people who have gone through violence, because usually it's traumatizing. It makes the person hate themselves, think they deserved it, and then in the community there's a lot of blame game that goes on. If you went through sexual violence, somebody's asking you, what were you wearing, where were you going, how were you walking? All that blame game happens. But we have a survivor-centered approach. That's a standard practice across the globe that seeks to look at the survivor and see how we can be able to assist them. So we have a couple of guiding principles there, and the first one is safety, to make sure that the survivor is safe from the scene of incidents. It might mean moving them from an abusive home. Of course, there are many decisions there. There are some people who will not want to leave an abusive home because their partner is the only provider. But then as much as possible, we need to move the survivor from the abusive scene and also just make them feel safe and secure. And then confidentiality, when it happens, we want to share with everybody that kuna msichana ameshikwa pale kijiji fulani. That is very confidential information. If it happens to you, you wouldn't want everybody to know. So you need to hold that information very confidentially, unless it's being shared with people that must know. For example, if you go to the doctor or to the police station, then it must be shared with the appropriate people. Then there's also the aspect on respect and dignity. This is a human being, they have their rights, they need their space. We really need to show them love and also that dignity in the way the matter will be addressed. And then non-discrimination. It doesn't matter whether it has happened to a boy, a girl, an old woman, a man. Everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and ensure that they access what they are supposed to access. Then in terms of accessing services, there are different needs that will be there, from the psychosocial support, mental health issues, legal, and even to some extent later we can start looking at economic empowerment so that we can help them to bounce back. Access to those services should be free, easily accessible, and we should be able to hold their hands so that they can be able to access that support. And then there's participation. Usually we tend to make decisions for people. So it has happened to me, I have been raped or I have been defiled. You assume that I do not know anything, that I'm not in control of the situation. That has happened to me and I have a voice over my life. So I should also be given a chance to say, this is what I want. I need some time to relax before we start talking about it. Just giving the survivor that space to be able to be themselves and to also input to the problem system. And then safety, we had already discussed it earlier. So just making sure that they feel safe and as we take care of them. So I will let another colleague, because there are quite many, to talk about the steps to take to report matters when they happen, and also the do's and don'ts in that, because it's very sensitive and people need to know that at all times. Thank you so much.
If I may,
Yes, please.
if I may just mention something concerning that. To be specific, rape, and I'd like to know if I intend to help somebody who has been raped, for example, find a victim of rape by the roadside, and you really want to help this person, but again, you also have a second thought on whether in your process of giving out your assistance, you might as well now interfere with the other process of administration of justice, because sometimes these victims must be assessed by, I don't know if it's the police. Samples from the scene must be taken and tested, things like those. So what happens if that is the situation? Is the best thing for me to probably collect the person and maybe take him to the hospital, or first collect the person and present the person to the police so that they can take they can be booked into the OB, or should I make a telephone call so that the rescue team can come to where the scene of crime has happened? So I'm a little bit not so sure on that particular case. Maybe if still Carol can help.
I'll speak and then my colleagues can also add. So the way SGBV happens, it's never planned. It's incidents from one place to the other. So the context really matters. What is available also matters. The ideal situation would be if we have like an emergency number, that if I call that emergency number in very few minutes, an ambulance will be there to collect that person so that they can be taken to the hospital first for attention. And then if the police could also come so that they can be able to collect evidence and do the necessary documentation. But what will happen, for example, if I go to Kibera or one of the places within the city, and the survivor is there and they're lying, they need help. I think as a human being, I will use the means available to get them to the hospital or to call the police, depending on the situation. I think you'd be able to make a judgment. That being an emergency, seeing what should I do first to save this life first, because that is what is very, very important. So what is very necessary is to make sure that they are safe and that you're able to save the life. And that would mean ensuring that there is medical assistance first, but also the police, that they can be able to come, collect evidence, and then continue with the next steps of the process until the case goes to court, and investigation also in between the process. Somebody else can add.
Great. Anybody else want to add anything?
I think that was very, very well answered in terms of what to do in a scenario such as that. Of course, the physical safety of the survivor is of utmost importance. And the good thing is, once you take the survivor to a hospital, that's where the rape kit, is done. That's where they take all the physical evidence from her, and like the P3 form and stuff. And so in one way or the other, like the medical legal aspect comes together within that context, although there is evidence in sort of like the physical location and stuff, but I think it's important. Otherwise, it's like finding someone who's been hit by a car on the road, and then you're like, let me just call the cops so they can come first and gather the evidence before we rush them to hospital, So yeah, but I'd also say definitely make a judgment. But I think the physical safety is really key. I think what I wanted to respond to was your earlier question. What role can we play? I think, first of all, I think it's important to just don't be a bystander. We see this stuff. And I think it's important for each and every one of us to know the signs and symptoms, or the signs that can show you maybe that a child is being sexually abused or violated at home. And some of us work with children. So I teach Sunday school. And sometimes there's behavioral things that will maybe give you an idea that something is happening at home. Like I said, one, it might be that overtly sexual behavior from a child, or comments, or maybe they just changed, their behavior changes, they become more quiet, they're not talking much, they start peeing the bed, or behaviorally they start acting out more. And these changes happen in different age groups. For teenagers, they might act out more. They might be, again, overtly sexual or afraid of being touched. And it's the same with children. I think it's important for us to learn these things, and so that we're able to observe. So if you see a child in your estate who is 7 years old and is lifting up her dress, and saying overtly sexual things, let's not say mtoto ana tabia mbaya, because that means this child has learned it from somewhere. There is something happening. And once we learn those things, once we stop dismissing behavior like that to just it being bad manners, and really looking and observing, then I think we're going to be able to assist more children. So there's hotline numbers. The child health care hotline number is 116. And we have the sexual and gender-based violence helpline number is 1195. We have a counseling helpline number, which is 1190. It's really good for teenagers. They can ask questions about sexuality. Also, the helpline on Auntie Jane, which talks about sexual reproductive health information. That information needs to be accessible to teenagers, but it also needs to be accessible to children. 2, use your social media platform, whatever platform that you have, to do good, man. Like I remember reading the posts that had been posted on, I mean, what you posted about the music, you know, and that made a difference because the video was pulled down. I've done a couple of petitions online, and trust you me, what it does is it brings conversations around the issue. Use whatever platforms we have to bring light to that issue. I think it's going to be incredibly important, but let's not be bystanders, and let's all step up and play a role in making sure that this stuff ends. Yeah.
I'm seeing Guido Benjamin says healthy conversation, very informative. Now, we are on the last question of this discussion. How can we address the invisible gap between the survivors of these forms of gender-based violence and the media? So I want Alex to answer that. So the question for Alex will be, how can we address the invisible gap between the survivors of these forms of gender-based violence and the media? And then I'm going to direct the same question, but now for government, to Nafula Wafula. How can we address the invisible gap between the survivors of these forms of GBV and the government? That's to you, Nafula Wafula. And then to Caroline, I want to ask, how can we address the invisible gap between the survivors of these forms of gender-based violence and the civil society? Of course, I understand a number of you have been dealing with these different aspects of the same matter interrelatedly, so you can jump in after to add or to clarify on a number of things when everybody answers the question. So let's start with you, Alex. How can we address the invisible gap between the survivors of these forms of gender-based violence and the media? Alex.
Thank you, Nyakundi. I think we, as media practitioners, we just need to put the story out there, because it's not until the story is heard, it's not until the story is seen, it's not until the story is read, that is when you can be able to get some meaningful redress. Because if these things happen and reports get to the newsrooms, but at the end of the day they don't get any airtime, then we are not helping victims of gender-based violence in any way. And sometimes also cases of gender-based violence or sexual assault or things like those will mostly be hidden. Like, most of the perpetrators do them behind scenes. They don't want them to be known. So it's work of the media again to do due diligence, to find out, to follow the leads, and to seek those people who have been affected by any form of sexual or gender-based violence cases in the community, and put the story out there, because that is when any meaningful advocacy or any meaningful action can be taken. Most of the time, stories which we've seen on media that involve violence, that involve assault, the same stories that we see having been acted on by the courts, and perpetrators also being brought to book. So it's upon the media people to take it now with at a higher notch, so that all the cases or instances where people get sexually molested, or cases of gender-based violence happening in the community can be addressed, can be given enough airtime on our media platforms, so that the gravity of the same can be felt, so that action against these vices can as well be given priority, because it's not until it's hard that meaningful action can be taken. So yeah, that is what I think can be done for the moment in our various media outlets.
Great. Caroline. Caroline, how can we address the invisible gap between the survivors of these forms of gender-based violence and the civil society?
Yes, civil society is definitely the driving force behind all this. We bring people together so that action can happen. And these actors are, we have the community members, we have the media, we have the different sectors that need to make this happen, right from media, education, the service providers, the government itself. We really need to bring everybody together and voice these issues. When we speak to the government, where are the resources for SGBV work? I was happy when I saw when the president was giving his last address on COVID-19, he also mentioned that SGBV cases are on the rise and we need to do something about it. 10 years ago, I'm sure you wouldn't hear the president saying such a thing, but now there's been a lot of advocacy and we are seeing, we are realizing fruits now, and we have to keep that going. So you need to move to the next step and ensure that the government is allocating resources for this work to be done. So a bit of social accountability there, both from the government side and the community members, so that you can hold the government accountable. Even when we get to use the resources, how are the resources being utilized? What projects are we doing? Are they being of common good to the women and girls, men and boys in regard to gender priorities? And then the other thing is around working with communities so that we can be able to empower both men and women with life skills, with the ability to report, access to services, in a way that is sustainable, in the way that people can be able to stand on their own and face these issues and work together to eradicate sexual and gender-based violence. So there's so much to do, but it is possible if we start step by step to attain the results we want to see. Thank you.
Great. Nafula Wafula.
Yeah. So bridging the gap between the survivor and government, I think one of the most important thing is that the policies that, first of all, we have a very, very strong policy environment in this country. Our policies are great. Implementation is where we have a challenge. There's a lack in implementation. So we focus a lot. Our advocacy efforts, first of all, as civil society, is to push for laws to be created. But I think we can do more in terms of ensuring that government is held accountable and that laws and policies are implemented, and that there is relevant or adequate resourcing that is going towards the implementation. So for example, we have gender desks. That's a great thing. But how many police stations in this country have actual operational gender desks with well-trained police officers? Very few. So, and how much money is being pushed towards ensuring this happens? Not a lot. So I think we need to push for, as opposed to just having on paper policies that are protecting children, survivors, we need to ensure that, most importantly, we need to ensure that these policies are being implemented, one, by making sure there's adequate resourcing, and two, accountability, holding different actors accountable to ensure that we don't have any gaps. Two is our policies need to be survivor centered. So we need to ensure that our policies meet our realities, and are centered around the needs of the survivors. And I think that's definitely one way in which we can bridge the gap between the survivors and the government. The third thing is expediting cases, or rather expediting cases, ensuring that there is no lag in access to justice. Because right now, I was in Kiambu the other day, and someone mentioned that they've been, and she's Nyumba Kumi. She's been following up on a child sexual abuse case. Now the child is an adult. She's 19. They started when she was 15. And the survivor has lost hope, like literally, and it's expensive because the case keeps being pushed and pushed and pushed. So I think that lag in access to justice is also a challenge, and the fact that we still haven't implemented policies like the creation of a sex offenders registry. That has never happened. It is in law, but we've never implemented it. So I think it's really important to follow up on stuff like that in terms of access to justice. Evidence-based advocacy is also important. So for example, we have evidence, so we have all this data around teenage pregnancy and that teenagers are having sex, but we still won't have comprehensive sexuality education despite the evidence that exists. Therefore, we are creating policies that are not responding to the needs of the society, but policies that are responding, but we are creating policies that only make a few people happy, e.g., the religious community, or like different sections that are lobbying. So for example, I'm a big proponent of there's a strong conversation around sexual reproductive health right now, and the bill that is in parliament. I know there's different thoughts around it, but the bottom line is we are forgetting that at the core of this, we are politicizing an issue without looking at the fact that we have teenagers and women that are dying every day or being affected every day, politicizing it and not addressing the issue. So I think it's important to ensure that our policies are evidence-based and survivor-centered, and they're not taken over by politicization. I think we need to plug in local government and community systems into the sort of like normal government procedures. People will report more often than not to the chief, to Nyumba Kumi. They will not go to the police as much. So we need to make sure that Nyumba Kumi police, that the systems operate all the way from Nyumba Kumi and the elders to the chief, to the police stations, over and over, mpaka Ministry of Health and Ministry of Gender, and that there's this multi-sectoral approach, but it needs to start from grassroots, because pastors and imams hear more sexual abuse cases than police stations in many cases, in many instances. A pastor in Kiambu told me he was getting 5 cases a day of SGBV that he was being called to a home at their what's it called? Like conflict resolution. And they solve it down there. They say, oh, no, we are going to pray, God has forgiven, for example. Or the chief says, okay, yeah, you need to resolve this. But at the end of the day, there's a child who is suffering. And it's because we are not bridging those systems properly to ensure everyone is well trained and that the whole system is well calibrated to work together. So yeah, those are the things that I think that should happen to ensure that government and the survivor at least are on the same page when it comes to dealing with this issue.
Awesome, thank you so much. I want to bring in Wanjiru Njeri. Wanjiru, you have I'd say you have benefited from being able to tell your story. And Alex earlier on talked about the importance of how the story is made and how it's reported. I'd like you to give us a few insights, even as we tie down this conversation in the next few minutes. How do you feel? What's the importance of having survivors being able to tell their stories, and how do they build themselves up to a point where they feel that they can? Is it important?
Come again at the last part. How do they?
How do they work on bringing themselves to a point where they are comfortable to tell their stories, and if it is at all important?
Yeah. So I think it is really important for one to talk about what has happened to you. It is one way of healing. And I think, according to me, I did not speak I did not come out public immediately. I came out public after 2 years. And it was enough time for me to heal, for me to accept that things happened the way they did, and for me to even love myself. Because, as Caroline said, it is very important for the survivors to be given a chance to make decisions. You know, it is my life, it is my experience, and my feelings are involved. And we go through psychological trauma that can be quite hard to heal if you do not have the right people surrounding you, if you do not have the right information. So I think it is important that survivors can talk about their stories when they feel it is right to talk about it. And one way the community can help in this is by stopping stigmatization, because stigmatization is one thing that will make people not talk about it. And when I talk about stigmatization, I would love to insist especially on the male gender. We've created a space where the male cannot talk whenever they get abused, whenever they get sexually harassed. Men cannot speak up because we force them to be men. When I say men, I mean strong people who are not supposed to have feelings, who are not supposed to feel vulnerable. You see, so I think it is very important for the community to stop stigmatization, for the community to be aware that these things do happen, and these things, it is very unfortunate if it happens to you. But again, we need to know that it is not the end of life. We need to get that psychological support. Um, it is very important when it comes to survivors telling their stories, and you benefit by, first of all, getting that peace, and you feel like you've achieved something. You know, when I talk about something, I feel like I've achieved over that. Again, you benefit by helping someone else who thought that they cannot speak out. You see, when we reduce the number of victims and survivors, it is a benefit to each of us. So that's what I'd say. Yeah.
And so we are drawing to the very end of this discussion. But I want you, Desmond. Is Desmond here with us? Desmond, I'd like you to give us a brief, as an artist. How do you? What's the role of art in these kinds of conversations? Is it important for artists to care? What can they do? How much more can be achieved if they plug in? Desmond.
Well, a tough question, but a very interesting one. Anyway, from where I stand, I think most of these conversations are not being heard, or people are not about, like the conversation make people feel uncomfortable. Yeah, and art for me is a thing that makes conversation palatable. For example, as an artist, I'll find a very interesting way on how to bring forth a topic without really attacking people with a lot of facts, you know? Without attacking people with a lot of facts. And because sometimes when you attack people with a lot of facts, they feel intimidated and they just switch off. Yeah. And because of that, as an artist, it's important for me that I figure out a model on how I'm going to bring out this conversation to the people, at the same time making them as comfortable as possible to have that said conversation. Number two, I think for me, it why I love most of the time tackling these issues using art is you can, as an organization or as an entity or as someone who is really interested in having these conversations, it's very hard to go to specific individuals and talk to specific people about certain topics. But it's always easier to get artists who have a following behind them, give them a concept. For example, as an artist, I have a following. I might have a following of around 1,000 people, 10,000 people, people who religiously follow whatever I do. When you gather the 10 of us and put us in a hall and tell us to create art that is going to speak about a certain topic, it will be easier and it will be cheaper, time saving for the 10 of us to reach out to 10,000 people than it will be for an organization or an entity to go to different communities and talk to people. Whatever we will be able to do let's say in a month, an entity will probably do it in a much longer time, just because of the following and the people that I have that actually are always there to take in my message. So I feel like when we start engaging, I know we have done this with Nafula, I've done this with you, Robin, and of course CapeOmnet are doing almost a similar thing. Most of the time when you start involving artists, people feel comfortable to start having certain conversations. And just because of that, I feel like it's a very important bridge that when it comes to tough issues, cases like something like incest, it will do a lot of good to involve art than not have it at all. Yeah. Okay.
Great. I'd like so this we have actually come to the end of our discussion, and we have shared very valuable insights. We have talked extensively about a very interesting topic, and we have learned a lot, both from each other and from the comment sections and the engagement we've been receiving. I'd like to add somebody else to the conversation on behalf of Peace Tree Network to give a vote of thanks, because this was the final discussion for this particular series. We will be having another leg of this same series sometime next month, so in a few weeks. And so that's something we will want to look out for. Please remember to like and subscribe the Facebook page and also the YouTube channel, because all these conversations will be here. So Rachel Stephanie.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
Hi everyone. I am just so thankful for you guys to have been in this conversation. Special thanks to Nafula Fula, to Caroline Nyambura, to Alex Mwangi, to Anjiru Jerry. Thank you so much to our panelists, that's Robin and Atieno. It's not easy to have these conversations, but you guys made it worth staying and listening in. I especially appreciate Wanjiru just opening up and talking about her story. I appreciate Desmond. At some point, I was like, oh, wow, I need to know my people. Yeah, but I really learned a lot from the stories given. The intellect from Caroline, I really appreciate and admire that. And Nafula, I really have no say, man. I am just especially great. Talking about the sex education bit of it, and you just gave me a totally different viewpoint on having this sex education. So I really give thanks towards that. Alex, I am appreciative that you actually asked that question regarding how do you handle a rape case? Where do you start from? That for me was just an eye opener, and I'm really thankful for that. Yes. Desmond Ogubi, that was an amazing performance. I felt it. Bless you. And with that, I just want to say thank you to all. as a team of hashtag Punctuality. Special thanks to our director. She could have been here, but she was not in a position to. So that's the reason why I'm on the spotlight. Our director, Martha Okumu, appreciates everything you guys have done. And we're really praying that and hoping that we will have a future engagement, as Robin has mentioned. I shouldn't say much. A lot has been said, so please allow me to just now hand it over back to Robin. Yes.
Awesome, great. So now I want us to have parting shots. Yeah, so even as we finish, I want us to have parting shots even as we finish. There's a question that has just been posted a few minutes ago, and in the interest of not letting anybody out, I'd like to direct it straight to the person who I imagine is best suited to answer it, and that will ideally be Alex. Alex Willie, however, is asking, apart from just telling the story, how can the media use its agenda setting feature to eradicate sexual violence? So along with the answer to that question, we can give our parting shots so that we can tie this down and we call it a series. So Alex, we start with you. Parting shots and the answer to that question.
Sorry, my mic was still off. My parting shot would be we just need to embrace these issues. We need to collectively pick these as a responsibility, so that we are able to assist in our own ways victims of sexual and gender-based violence, and more so also to prevent, if we can find some way to prevent, just like someone was saying, if you see a girl in the village and she's acting in a very suggestive manner, that will likely expose her to probably rape or any form of sexual violence, you can intervene so that you rescue that girl or that boy from such situation that will put her in a risk. Then to the question that was asked in terms of agenda setting, I think as media, the biggest role that the media can take is also to drive in this narrative that sexual and gender-based violence cases should be avoided as much as possible. For the media consumers also to disseminate content that is not sexist, as it was put, so that the less media puts across content that is suggestive in nature, then it means the kind of effect that will trickle down to the community will also help in reducing cases of these sexual violence that is happening. So I think it's just giving more light to issues which can bring redress to these, and also avoiding content that can expose especially children and those who are vulnerable to sex or to sex predators, or to situations which can lead people to be sexually molested or violated in terms of their rights to decency or something of the sort. So basically, that is what can be done by media, and I believe that if we take it together as a collective responsibility, not only the media but also other stakeholders, because it's a multifaceted kind of approach where the civil society has something to play, has a role to play, and then the media also has a role to play, and the government has a role to play. Also on the media side, I think the role of protection can also come in very handy, in that In the process of trying to put the story out, probably you don't also end up inflicting more pain or injuring the victim as a result of you telling that story. The concept of confidentiality as well to the victims of sexual violence can also apply, so that somebody does not shy off from telling the story, knowing that probably the identity has been concealed, and they have nothing to worry about, because some of them are victimized. Like you end up being victimized if somebody sees you on TV or radio saying that you are raped. So they fear, sometimes they fear that victimization when it comes to media. So when you assure that victim that you are going to guarantee confidentiality, but also put the story out there so that the actors, state and non-state actors, can take it up, then that can also be a good idea, can be a good point for the media side.
Thank you so much. Nafula, closing remarks.
Yeah, I think just before I say my closing remarks, in regard to this particular question, I think the media can also play a big role in accountability. So if there's more conversations around the gaps that exist within implementation of policies driven by the media, then I think it'll make a huge difference. So if the media was to really hone into the fact, for example, that we don't have a sexual offenders registry, and yet it is in law, it's going to be a point of conversation, and ensuring that the relevant policymakers are put under the spotlight by the media, I think is a very key way of them playing a role. Two is ensuring that they're highlighting cases. A lot of these cases go and disappear somewhere on the way line. And so, for example, that case I mentioned, where the girl's case has been going on for 4 or 5 years, it's never ended. Highlighting a case such as that will ensure that it's putting some sort of public pressure onto the justice system to ensure that because it's public interest, the issue will be addressed a bit faster. So I think the media has a very, very strong accountability role to play, but it's also important that the media uses the right language. One, the media should never victim blame. That happens a lot. The media sets the tone for the conversations. And so the other day there was a story about a girl. It was about early and child marriage, and they said 14-year-old girl tastes marriage twice. And I was like, what do you mean tastes marriage twice? And so how we talk about survivors' issues and how those stories are written in a way that doesn't put blame on the survivor ever, in a way that communicates that this is a crime, and looking at languages such as when we use slay queen and dress provocatively in a sentence, even if this woman was raped, if that is in a media story, what sort of public perception does it create, and what sort of tone does it create? So I feel like the media needs to be well trained as well in terms of how to share, how to write survivor stories. And we need more women in editing. We need more women in the media that understand this sort of issues as well. So my parting shot is, I think, like I've said a lot of stuff in the course of this conversation in terms of how we can address the issue as it happens. But I think what I'd like to part with is, one, it is our responsibility to address this issue. It is all of our responsibility, especially right now with COVID happening and kids are home. We all need to step up our game. We need to hold government accountable. But I think also my parting shot, because all that has been mentioned, my parting shot is to adult survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. Or rather, adult survivors of childhood sex abuse. So first of all, Desmond, thank you for sharing your story. And I think we need to have more honest conversations around the effects of childhood sex abuse on adults. And we need to make sure that we talk about that shame that people carry on from their childhood into adulthood, and how this plays a role in, one, either perpetrating other, like, repeat cases of sexual assault in the lives of these adults, depression, anxiety. There's so many things, eating disorders, failed relationships and marriages, like overt sort of like sexuality, or rather irresponsible sexual behavior, alcohol and drug abuse. There are so many things that research is showing stems from that abuse that happened when sexual abuse that occurred when people were children. And we need to have more conversations around that. So two things. So us guys are working on, we'll be doing a series, Tunawiri will be doing a series on childhood sex abuse, how to recognize the signs, what to do from the perspective of a parent or an adult, how to talk to children about sex and sexuality. But we'll also be talking about effects of childhood sex abuse on adults and how that manifests. And we'd like to create, we are working on like online support groups. We have a curricula that we have with a partner organization that we're going to be using to help guys set up support groups for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence and adult survivors of childhood sex abuse. So that's one thing. And secondly, please follow or check out Justice for Every Child KE hashtag. It's a hashtag, Justice for Every Child KE. It's a campaign on child protection. It's a collaborative effort with very, very many different organizations. Sexual and gender-based violence is one of the issues that is being addressed, this week. Just if you search for that hashtag on Twitter, on Facebook, you'll get more information on it. And please sign our petition on change.org. The petition is called Zuia Zogo. So just Google Zuia Zogo and you'll get more information on the petition that we're pushing for government to be able to address this issue effectively. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Robin, Des, and it was great engaging with all the amazing panelists.
Thank you so much, Nafula. That petition, I've been part of the campaign from the early stages, and I know it's doing a lot of change, and it's important for us all to go ahead and sign. Anybody watching, I'm seeing right now we're at 13, but I'm sure the statistics will say we have a greater reach and engagement on this platform right now. So I'd like everybody to go on ahead and go and sign the petitions. It has 6 key asks, and it's basically us telling the government and institutions within this field that accountability is something we are demanding for as Kenyans, and that these things cannot continue happening. So it's really important. And then I'd like to have Wanjiru Njeri give us your parting shots, and as we close the discussion.
So my parting shots would be, everyone has a role to play in curbing sexual abuse, in curbing teenage pregnancies. And I believe when each of us plays their part, everything is going to be okay, because we can never live on blame games. When you live on blame games, you'll never get a solution. But when each of us takes up that responsibility, if you are an artist and I would love to speak to artists. I don't see the reason why you should make something just for the sake of money, yet you are ruining other people's lives. Because as Desmond said, an artist ni kioo cha jamii. Don't be a bad reflection. Don't be a bad example. Then as a parent, you're supposed to provide a very good environment for your child. And I've seen people living in slums becoming good people. So living in a slum should not be an excuse. And also the system should has a big role to play. I would love, if there's any person from the government who's listening or watching this, I would love to appeal to you guys. As much as you make condoms free, please also remember to make sanitary towels free, because our girls are suffering outside there, you see. And this is a very great platform, and I would want to thank Peace Tree Network for this opportunity. Please continue voicing the stories and solutions to people. You are making a very good impact. And as I leave this, please, for any parent who has a troubled teenager and may want help, I am readily available for that. I do that. So I'm a life teenager coach. I coach these teenagers on that. So you can always reach to me. I am on Jiron Jerry on all social media platforms. And thank you for every panelist who's been there. It was an amazing experience and a very enriching conversation. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Great. Caroline, parting shots.
Thank you so much. This has been an exciting show. Apart from being a panelist, I have also learned. My parting shot is going to be about prevention of violence against women and girls, or SGBV if you like. When we look at perpetrator statistics, of course, most of them are men. But in my opinion, I think we now need to stop the blame game and move to action. And one way that we need to do this, first of all, is by having value-based conversations with men and boys and everyone, especially for men and boys, speak to them in a language that they understand, because if you keep blaming them, you're not going to get a solution. And then there's a methodology that Trokia implements on prevention of sexual and gender-based violence. It's called SASA Faith methodology. I know most of you might have heard about SASA, but not many know about the SASA Faith. SASA Faith adds the faith component, where we work with faith communities to engage communities in conversations to be able to change values and beliefs around SGBV. So in SASA Faith, we use a benefits-based approach. So instead of telling people you're the perpetrator, you did this wrong and all that, you show them the benefits of not doing that wrong. For example, the men in this group, you have a mom, you have a sister, you have a daughter. If we ensure that we are in a violence-free community, then there's going to be a benefit for all of us, and also looking at how people are using their power. So if we embrace that positive vibe, then we will have a violence-free tomorrow. And as my colleagues have said, everybody has a role to play, and it is possible to actually eliminate violence in our families. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And finally, Desmond Ogubi, parting shots.
Me, I just want to thank you guys for teaching me stuff. It's always a learning and unlearning process, and most of the time when you hear people who actually have first-hand experience on most of these issues, you tend to always learn a lot. And I always say this: we can't keep relegating issues like this to the next generation to sort out issues. It's time that we, as a generation that exists on this earth today, are able to figure out solutions that the kids that you're trying to raise are going to say, because of our parents, because of our grandfathers, we were able to live in a world where a woman can walk on the streets at 12 in the a.m. and nothing happened to them. She walked in between bus station and no one would know. And we need to have. We don't need to getting small safe spaces. Kenya, the world has space. But before we start pushing this small space into certain areas whereby, oh, when I'm in school, that's a safe space. When I go home, my dad abuses me, then we are not doing much. So we can't keep relegating the issue of gender, sexual based violence to the next generation of people who come up. And we have so many allies. We don't need everyone. The point is, we honestly don't need everyone. The people that are here, the people that are for this, are enough people to make a change. We have had movements that were started by individuals, and we were able to act. They were able to make changes. So I know of over 100 people who are doing this. That's big change Kenya. And the more we continue having these conversations and talking about these issues, for this to be sorted out. That's how we change policies, that's how we change perceptions, how we change attitudes, that's how we eliminate stereotypes. So asanteni sana, and I hope that we will have more of this. Yes, thank you, Robin and Pastry Network.
Great. So right now we are done with the discussion. I'd like to relay the apology of one of the panelists who we tried to really reconnect. His name is Katiba Mkungu. Katiba Mkungu is the member of Kwale County Government on the GBV Operational Committee. Yeah, he's the head of the District Peace Committee in Kwale County also. He wasn't able to join us because of a few technical issues, but we will be sure to loop him in the next leg of discussions. I'd like to, of course, give a huge thanks to Peace Tree Network and to the great number of people working in the scenes behind Ukunyuma. When you hear me say we are sorting it out and I'm still in the live, there's a team of people who are doing it up behind us. And just to acknowledge them, we have Willie Oeba. Willie Oeba is a spoken word artist. He's an artist of great repute. He has been able to win so many awards, and he has been part of the team handling the social media. He currently has a piece online on YouTube. It's called Dear Death. So if you can go to YouTube and check it out, that would be dope. We also have a gentleman called Tunhood. Tunhood is also a creative artist. He works in animation and is also a spoken word artist. He also has a piece out. It's called What If? It's a short film. So if you can also check that out on YouTube, that would be really, really great. And finally, we have Evanskes. We have Evankes, who is also a social media specialist and an artist. Yeah, you can also check him out. You will see him greatly featured in the comment section. And finally, we have our very own Spontaneous the Poet, who is an award-winning poet and artist. You can also check out her social media pages at Spontaneous Treehouse on all platforms. I am myself, Robin Omeka. I have been moderating this discussion with the help of Faith Atieno. I also perform on stage as a storyteller. My stage name is Enigma Creative. And I'm sure we will get to meet each other on so many of these platforms moving forward. Creative is with a K. So it's Enigma Creative with a K. Thank you so much for joining in. It has been a great discussion. Unfortunately, we have to love you and leave you. So this is us loving you and leaving you. Asanteni sana. See you next time. Peace.